Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of India's most perplexing, tragic, and fiercely debated mysteries, the 2008 Noida Double Murder Case. We're going to unpack the shifting theories, the heavily compromised evidence, and the legal roller coaster that followed. Think about this for a second. How does a double murder, taking place inside a crowded, affluent apartment complex, go permanently unsolved? To understand how a botched initial response left us with a permanent void of truth, we really have to look at the sheer chaos that unfolded in those critical first few hours. In this explainer, we're going to cover 5 key areas: how the double murder unfolded, the shockingly botched crime scene, the 2 major and wildly different investigative theories, and finally, the ultimate legal resolution. All right, part 1, the double murder unfolds. Let's look at the events of May 15th and 16th, 2008. Things moved incredibly fast here, and honestly, with a massive amount of confusion. At 6 a.m. on May 16th, 13-year-old Aarushi Talwar was found dead in her bed by her parents, who were both dentists, Dr. Rajesh and Dr. Nupur Talwar. By 8:30 a.m., the police were already actively suspecting the family's live-in helper, Hemraj simply because he was nowhere to be found. But here's where the story takes its first huge turn. The very next morning at 10:30 a.m., Hemraj's body was discovered on the apartment's locked terrace. So within just over 24 hours, both Aarushi and Hemraj were found dead at the exact same residence. Moving right into Section 2, a botched crime scene where an unbelievable amount of evidence was lost forever. 90%. Just let that staggeringly high number sink in for a second. The Central Bureau of Investigation, or the CBI, later claimed that 90% of the physical evidence at the crime scene was destroyed due to extreme police negligence. I mean, 90%. Almost everything investigators would actually need to solve a crime was literally gone before it could be properly analyzed. So how exactly do you lose 90% of a crime scene? Well, the local UP police completely failed to secure the apartment. They didn't cordon it off at all. This meant crowds of media, neighbors, and random visitors just freely trampled right through the house. Crucially, the police couldn't find the key to the locked terrace door on the first day, meaning they completely missed Hemraj's body for an entire 24 hours while they were out actively hunting him as the prime suspect. By the time they finally did find him, bloody footprints and drag marks on the terrace were already totally compromised. To make matters even worse, 24 out of the 26 fingerprints they gathered were collected improperly and couldn't even be used. It was a complete disaster. Now, when you look at the forensic autopsies, a chilling pattern emerges. Both victims suffered identical injuries. First, a heavy, blunt weapon caused a specific U or V-shaped trauma. Then, this was followed by an incredibly precise slitting of the throat. We're talking cuts that dissected the vital carotid artery with such clinical precision that investigators immediately knew they were dealing with someone who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. And this brings us to the core problem caused by that compromised crime scene. The exact same physical wounds were interpreted in drastically different ways, completely depending on which suspects the authorities were targeting at the time. The first CBI team insisted the weapon was a Nepali cookery knife, saying it perfectly fit the deep incisions. But later on, a totally different second CBI team argued the weapons were actually a golf club for the blunt trauma and a surgical scalpel, which matched the surgical precision you'd expect from, say, dental surgeons. Same wounds, totally different theories. Let's get into Section 3. Theory 1, the assistants and those infamous narco interrogations. Driven by highly controversial narco tests, truth serum interviews, the first CBI team hypothesized a pretty horrifying scenario. Their theory went like this. Hemraj invited 3 friends, Krishna, Rajkumar, and Mandal, to his room. After drinking, the men supposedly wandered into Aarushi's unlocked room and attempted an assault. When she resisted, Krishna allegedly killed her with a kukri. Then, terrified that Hemraj would turn them in, the 3 men dragged him up to the terrace and murdered him to eliminate the only witness. But, as you might guess, this theory completely collapsed under scrutiny. Why? Because absolutely zero physical forensic evidence placed any of these men at the scene. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing. Plus, they had strong alibis placing them elsewhere that night. And those narco tests, they aren't even legally admissible in court, and the suspects' drug stories conflicted wildly with each other anyway. The end result was inevitable. All 3 men were quietly released in September 2008 because there was literally no hard evidence to hold them. Which brings us to Section 4. Theory 2. The parents. A completely circumstantial case. In 2009, a new CBI team took over, and the focus completely shifted to the people inside the house, Aarushi's parents. The CBI built a purely circumstantial case. They argued there was no forced entry and that the crime scene had been dressed up to look a certain way. They also pointed out Rajesh's initial failure to identify Hemraj's body. The CBI theorized Rajesh found Aarushi and Hemraj in an objectionable position and murdered them in a sudden fit of rage. But the Talwars pushed back hard. They maintained they slept through the murders because of extremely loud air conditioning units. They strongly denied altering the scene, pointing out that if they were trying to hide a murder, they wouldn't have left a bloodied sketch bottle sitting in plain sight on the dining table. As for the golf clubs the CBI suspected, they were also sitting right out in the open, with zero DNA on them. Furthermore, both parents easily passed polygraph and brain mapping tests.
So after all of this back and forth, what did the CBI actually do? In 2010, they filed a closure report. Basically, this is a formal document recommending a case be closed because there just isn't enough evidence to go to trial. Even though they named Rajesh Talwar as their sole suspect, the CBI admitted they couldn't proceed. The gaps were just too massive. Missing murder weapons, absolutely none of the victim's blood on the parents' clothing, and a total lack of conclusive proof.
But then we get this massive twist. The special CBI court magistrate looked at that closure report and flat out rejected it. Instead of closing the case, the magistrate ordered trial proceedings to begin against the Talwars. So the parents were forced to stand trial for a double murder based almost entirely on the exact same circumstantial evidence that the CBI themselves just said was insufficient. And that leads us to our final section, Part 5, the ultimate legal resolution of this grueling decade-long battle. Talk about a legal roller coaster. On November 25, 2013, the trial court actually found Rajesh and Nupur Talwar guilty, sentencing them to life in prison. But that wasn't the end. 4 years later, in October 2017, the Allahabad High Court completely acquitted both parents. They ruled that the evidence didn't even come close to proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The CBI, still not willing to let it go, challenged this acquittal in the Supreme Court in 2018. You really have to hear the language the High Court used when they handed down that acquittal. It was a scathing castigation of the CBI's entire theory. The judges called it an impossible hypothesis and patently absurd. They aggressively highlighted how the lower trial court had relied on incredibly weak circumstantial evidence, essentially punishing the parents based on mere suspicion rather than hard, verifiable facts. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. I want to leave you with a thought that really sticks with me. If investigators effectively destroy 90% of the evidence at a crime scene, can justice ever truly be served? The 2008 Noida Double Murder Case remains officially unsolved to this day. It stands as a devastating reminder of the massive human cost of a botched investigation, a runaway trial by media, and the elusive nature of the truth. So what do you think really happened that night? Let that question sit with you as we wrap up today's deep dive.